Okay.
Hello. Welcome to day 2 of the 32nd annual OPA's Open Studio Tours. My name is Kirk Shannon-Butts. I'm the Public Art Manager and Curation Manager for BOPA. Today, we are here with Jill Orlov, who is a tiny furniture maker working...
That makes me sound small.
Right, working in metal. So welcome, Jill.
Thank you.
So I'm going to ask Jill a few questions, and then she's going to walk us through her studio, and you'll see her amazing sculpture. So first, I just want to ask, obviously, the obvious question: how did you get started?
So many reasons, I think, how I fell into this. Back to being a kid with a dollhouse, and maybe even before that, I've always just been obsessed with scale of things, big things, little things. I was thinking about this, like how to answer this earlier, and when I was little, my aunt and uncle had a gigantic pencil. Things that were used in stores for advertising. It was a 6 or 7 foot long pencil.
So how old were you?
Probably like 10 or 6.
So you were tiny.
I was little. And a gigantic pencil, and I was obsessed with this pencil. Eventually, when I moved to Baltimore, they gave it to me. So it's in my house now, leaning against the wall, like practically up to the ceiling. And, I went to college or grad school in Philadelphia for architecture school. So that's where I got my background. I'm a former architect. And Klaus Oldenburg had a couple sculptures in Philadelphia.
So you have to tell them who Klaus Oldenburg
is. He's a
is.
sculptor, a public works sculptor who makes gigantic things. So there's a button that's probably 8 feet in diameter sitting out in the courtyard, or a gigantic clothespin that's probably 15 feet tall. And so that.
And if we can reference pop culture, if you know the movie Clueless, Cher mentioned Klaus in the
Oldenburg,
movie.
yeah. So I've just always loved the play of scale. And so back to my career as an architect, how I fell into finding architecture was kind of on a whim. Going into the architecture school in undergrad in Virginia, we went into the architecture school. My roommate wanted to visit a friend, and while she's talking to him, I'm looking at all the models that are all over everybody's desk, thinking this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. We didn't have computers back then. I'm dating myself. So I just fell in love with that world and transferred in, and no turning back for a number of years.
So what are those called?
Just the models.
Models.
Just study models. So like then when I went into architecture
right, and
school,
before audience, some of you may or may not know, but before computer-aided design, you would have had to build a small...
Or drawings.
Drawings, right.
Most people did tons of drawings. Unlike a classic artist, I'm not really strong, I don't think, in drawing, painting. That's not my skill set. So, but I've always made things with my hands. Even when I was little, I made little things out of Sculpey. I made a teeny tiny fruit bowl that could fit on the tip of your finger. My stepmom has that now. So I've always been into making things.
But why the scale?
Why the scale? Just I fell in love with teeny tiny things. One of the first things I bought when I traveled abroad in college were these tiny blown glass giraffe and horse. They were probably this big, but I was just obsessed with teeny tiny things. Eventually, my collection of dollhouse paraphernalia made its way into my vignettes. So I had to let go of them.
So how did you get to Baltimore? You mentioned that in...
After college, I followed a friend.
Okay. Wow. So you've been here for how long?
Since 1995.
Wow.
A long time.
Right. So I'm going to say that, obviously a part of Open Studio Tours is highlighting the different artist communities. And Jill is here in the Whitehall.
This is Whitehall's a different mill. Okay. This one is called the Mill Center.
The Mill Center. And what's this community called?
Well, I guess it's kind of South Hampden. And then we're along the Jones Falls Valley. Along the Jones Falls, it's not really a river. It's called the Falls. All these mill complexes from the mid-1800s. This was one of the biggest industrial
communities in
complexes,
Baltimore.
communities in the U.S.'s history.
Right.
This is where they made cotton sailcloths
Right.
for the clipper ships.
Right.
So there's a lot of history here, and we're in one of the old mills.
And it's obviously been reappointed
To offices and artists.
in artists,
Yeah,
right.
the
And their
building is-
galleries here. And,
There's a well-known gallery upstairs. Half the building, almost half, are artists, and the other half are regular traditional offices. But we're one of the mills that didn't get renovated in the past 10 or so years. So we don't have fancy restaurants or fancy apartments. It's just studios and offices.
so it still has a more and as Jill
And you can see my space is very rough.
as Jill takes you around, you'll see that this has some authenticity still left in the building, going back to her architectural roots. You know, you'll see the beams that is quite lovely, and the walls are amazing.
There's actually a stream that runs under our building, so in that
wow.
door, and in the door across the hall,
You can
would
see the water.
actually see the water.
Oh, that's
It's not
amazing.
pretty, and they're very scary spots. So
It seems
I
scary.
pretend they're not existing.
'Cause it was,
I want to see it.
I know. So before we get, I let Jill go on her tour. I just want to tell the story how we met. It is quite interesting because I was working for Glass Artists where we were yesterday, and Jill came in with her mother one Sunday morning, and we just started talking, and it was like I knew her forever. I felt like I had gone to college with her, and we had separated. And I hadn't seen her in like
several years ago. We
Right.
bonded right away.
at least 4 years ago. And so it was near closing time. So I was like, oh, well, I'll come back to your studio. She was telling me about her art. And I was like, I want to see, I curate. And so she was like, okay. So they hung out, she and her mother. And then I followed them here,
I think you came
or came with you, right? And then, and that's
spent
how
the
we,
entire day together.
yeah, it was, we had so much fun. It was, so I came here. This is my second time here. And obviously she's so, excuse me, I mean, as a curator, mostly you're seeing a lot of painting and large scale sculpture. So to see someone doing something so personal and specific was just so amazing. And I don't know if at that time, if you had seen it, I was telling her about the movie it's called Tiny Furniture. I think we were,
I still haven't seen it.
right. And I was telling her about this movie, it's called Tiny
Is that the
Furniture.
Lena Dunham?
Yeah, the
Sorry,
Lena
I will
Dunham.
see it. I will see it.
Right, it's pre-girls and all this, and I remember seeing that film, and so it was so fascinating to meet someone who was actually doing it because it was a movie. So in a movie, it
You
doesn't
don't
seem
realize
real.
how many places miniatures take place in commercials, in
Right.
TV shows and movies. If you're looking for it, you will see it all the time, but you don't even realize how often miniatures come into play. And there are what were called miniaturists
Right.
all over the world.
Right.
There's traditional ones, and then there's ones that try to cross over into the fine art world, which is what I
Like you are.
which I
Right.
try to do.
No, she's doing it. She's doing it quite successfully. I have to support my artists, and I went to see her at the
Baltimore ACC, the American Craft Council.
right.
Shows a huge fine craft show at our convention center, 600 plus artists, and that was in February, right before the world turned
So I
upside
got the
down.
opportunity to I got the opportunity to see her work
Also,
in sort of what would you call it?
well, we have
Because I don't want to say
booths,
gallery, but
well,
you,
kind of just more in a kind of like a gallery setting. You set up your space, usually 10 feet by 10 feet, and that's where these big photos came into play. But I'll get back to how they even came into existence because I didn't print them. But so yeah, and then you set it up kind of as close to a gallery
Right.
setting as possible, so people can see your work in the best possible.
and it was nice again because I had only seen her in her studio.
My messy
So
studio.
to take it out and see it properly staged was really wonderful, and watch other
Better
people
lighting.
enjoying, amazing lighting, other people enjoying it and talking to her and asking about it. As a curator, it makes you see how the audience and the public will respond to an artist's ideas that have been interpreted into a sculpture. And then with this whole element of that, so tiny and how you make. So I when you walk people through us through, make sure you let people know the how you're transforming. Like I'm looking here, obviously the bottom or top of a bottle, and you
Which-
cut it
which
and made it into a
actually-
chandelier. So it's
Wow.
amazing. So
Yeah.
I just want to share that our story.
But actually, many full circles, backtracking to I don't do much with glass. I one day want to learn lamp working, but it was actually Anthony Cordetti who cut that bottle for me.
Oh, no way. And that's also a good thing how, again, in Baltimore, we touched on this yesterday, how people here, the artist community really does collaborate and work together.
Very helpful.
It is really nice coming from New York where people can be really quite separate. Just because it's New York, it's not anything people are adversary, but it's New York. People are busy and right, and very competitive. But here I feel like
so helpful here. I've had so much help from so many other artists and jewelers, which we'll come back to another project in a bit.
So also wanted to let the audience know that Jill's work is definitely for sale. You can reach out for her to her. We want to sell her. And so you can find her on her own social media handles. She has her own website, but obviously you can get in contact with me at both, and I will put you in touch with Jill directly. So, and I want to lastly say that was one of the things when I showed up to your booth that day. You had just sold that table, which is amazing. So,
to a local Baltimore couple who actually collects local artists. They have a beautiful collection.
So you need to connect me with them. For my art.
I connected you with another patron of the arts. Yeah.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah, that was amazing. Thank you. So now I'm going to, let's look at some art.
Okay.
Where do you want to
We're gonna start with this one right here.
Well, actually, let's start with go back in
Backward.
progression
Makes
and
sense.
build up to that, which will not be too far in the past.
Of course.
But so I started out making what I called rooms in boxes, and so this is one of my first vignettes, and I was cleaning when Kirk came in. So I learned from another curator to clean with little soft painter brushes. So even though I'm not a painter, I have little brushes, and they just are soft ways to dust. And it can be kind of like Zen-like to dust around little nooks and crannies that are so delicate. So, and back to the things that I had as a child or just growing up that I ended up incorporating into my pieces. This pocket watch was my great-grandfather's. And so it's just, even though these things are super special, it shows the love that I put into the pieces. Hopefully that conveys. And
well, I think that's also important to discuss because obviously people won't know that was your grandfather's watch, but that makes it super special.
Yeah.
But also just the translation of that watch into a huge
wall
clock, even though it's miniature.
Right.
But here it translates into a huge wall clock.
Right.
It's stunning. Right.
So my I'm not formally trained as an artist. I was trained as an architect, but I always wanted to learn welding, and so I started out using what's called a MIG welder, which in the class that I took at our art school, Micah, the teacher said basically, that's the hot glue gun of welding. I would never got that great at using a MIG welder. It's very kind of can be messy, and I never got that great at it. But I quickly wanted to jump away from MIG welding to TIG welding, which is a much more precise type of welding, and it took me a long time to get it. It's difficult. I kept asking people, I'm just not getting it. And they just constantly said, you have to practice. And I finally actually got there when I
how long did that take? It sounds like a long process.
Well, I took the class. It was a very specialized just one TIG class. Me and 4 other guys in more industrial settings. 2 people worked on bridges. 1 person worked on industrial machinery. 1 person had his own airplane, and me. And they just were enamored with me in a funny way because they're like, asking the teacher, have you ever had an artist in your class? And these were all just, it was just but even though not the art world, they were also super helpful.
Right.
So it was an intense weekend, like 8 hours a day of learning TIG welding. And it's kind of like sewing, where you've got your feeder wire in one hand, you've got the torch in another, and you've got a foot pedal or a thumb switch to control the electricity. So It's complicated, but I do love it now. It's kind of almost like sewing.
So do you
It's
use it in
quieter.
all of your sculptures basically
Yeah.
now?
Yes, except for when we get to my last project, no welding involved.
Okay. All right.
So this is a game room in a box. I didn't want to call it a man cave because women play pool. I play pool. At least they used to. So I haven't in a long time. So that's this piece. Hangs on a wall, and it's in an old vintage wooden container called wool soap.
So is this found materials?
Yeah, I mix things. I collected wooden boxes for decades. I've collected all kinds of things, not knowing eventually what I would do with them. But I had wooden boxes forever and ever. They're all on the back, and eventually I came up with purposes for several of them.
So now does this close?
No, that doesn't close. But sometimes I do have operational, functional pieces,
right.
but that doesn't. So no, I mean the pull cues do kind of like they.
I'm still fascinated by the use of a glass top as a
Right.
chandelier.
Right.
So
That was
cool.
an elixir bottle, an antique bottle, and I just loved kind of the Art Deco
Right.
shape of it.
And the color is so intense.
Well, I had to find a green glass bottle because that's your classic green glass
over the
billiards table light.
Right.
So it took a while. And
so
that's another part
So where'd you find the glass?
That was online from a woman who sold bottles, antique bottles online, and I learned a lesson.
Right.
So I bought it from her, a full bottle, and she hadn't shipped it yet. And I made the mistake of telling her I was going to be cutting it. And she looked up my work and said, if I hadn't done this a year ago and knew that you were going to cut it, I would have stopped the sale.
Right. Wow.
But what I saw your work, and I know it's going to have a new life in something beautiful, she said, I am happy to have you have it. And then she started sending me pictures of all kinds of things that she wanted me to incorporate in other pieces. So she ended up becoming a sweet friend. But I learned, don't tell people what you're using things for until it's safely in your hands.
Yeah, because people are connected to their art.
Yes, that was her thing. The antique bottles. Right. And so yeah. But that was almost a loss because I found the perfect bottle. So.
But it worked out best, and it's good for everyone to have some sort of evolution. So that's good.
It did.
So what's next?
So next, I read an article in the New York Times about these people who follow miniaturists, and one was Kate Unver, and she does a daily blog called, or a daily Instagram called the Daily Mini, and she got me in touch with a gallery owner in the Hudson Valley who had a little gallery of miniatures, and he was trying to cross over in the art world. You know, he had the traditional miniatures, the doll houses, and all that. And so he's like, let's do a show. And he came, and I told him, well, I already had another piece based on Archie and Edith's show.
All in the Family.
All in the Family,
Okay.
Thank you. And I told him I've always wanted to do a Julia Child's kitchen. And he said, and we need a third. I can't remember the order, actually. And the Brady Bunch. Yeah, I said I'm an architect, or I was. And I feel like I've always wanted to do the Brady Bunch because those Brady Bunch stairs, you have to have, you know, I knew I had to do this as a former architect.
That's amazing.
So he came up with this theme called Those Were the Days. Classic TV show sets reimagined.
From the 70s or something?
From the 70s, yeah. You know, just kind of that set. Julia Child's kitchen.
Well, I was gonna ask you about that because I was gonna say more like vignettes, but they do look like sets.
Yeah.
Right.
So you know, my process and my inspiration, you know, started to transform. So different things. This is actually a bourbon stopper from a Blanton's bourbon. The horses, what I discovered, all come in different shapes depending on spelling out Blanton. So I wanted the B, which is the first horse standing still. So it was the closest that I could find to that classic sculpture that the Bradys had on their flat files.
The attention.
And then, you know, as I'm getting to these layers, and I started using different materials. This is all steel, but I started adding other materials like copper screen heating them up, patina them to get different colors, like this kind of Montreal-like artwork. The blue was very difficult at that time, but I'd gotten almost completed, and then I saw this piece, because you don't really notice the detail until you're delving into this.
Doing your
and
research.
I was like, that doesn't look like it goes to this mid-century modern style, but I had to create it as close as possible. So I used a silver earring, a little tiny parts of a watch, and parts of a key. So little jewelry parts started entering my work as well.
Wow. So what year are these two pieces?
Oh dear, you're asking. 4 or 5 years ago.
Oh, because I want to say I saw this one when I came with the what I've seen.
So 4 to 5 years ago.
I think you were maybe working on it or something.
I have the dates quickly on the back.
I love the fireplace. Look at these. What are those?
And people didn't even remember that there was a fireplace in there. So the structure of this house, which recently got renovated by HGTV
with the brothers,
with those tall brothers, and the structure was very prominent. And so I had
shout out to HGTV.
I had
okay.
super rusted, pitted, had been out in the sun and the water for probably years. This is steel, so it just gave that kind of rough brick stone look. So that was kind of the structure to kind of reminisce about the structure of the Brady Bunch house. So hopefully that kind of conveys as the heavy duty part of the house, the structure.
Sure.
It needs to be in the house now that it's renovated.
Owned by the Property Brothers.
Property Brothers, right. We'll have to put them in a hashtag or the Drew. Drew or something.
Yeah.
So what's next?
All right. So quick thing. Way back when I first started, I contacted the Baltimore Museum of Art, the BMA, the buyer in the store, in the gift shop, and they were having a show based on home, and so I had a few pieces in that gift shop related to the exhibit that was opening. I'm getting way off track, and so the things that I had in that were I had a dining room, a couple of tables, and a kitchen. That's a total aside. I'm mixing my stories up. But the curator at the American Visionary Art Museum, AVAM, saw my work there. So I did mean to mention this. Saw my work there. And it was Rebecca Hoffberger who contacted me about, there's another piece on your site that we want to have in the exhibit called Food. It was the history, fantasy, and future of food. And I was like, she's like, a tiny golden orb. I'm like, I have no idea I don't remember what you're talking about. And she's describing this orb, and I finally remember I had entered 5 or so years ago there was a competition called the Design Within Reach, did a champagne chair competition every year right after New Year's. Everybody went through their champagne bottles, and then it was, I think, a worldwide competition. Probably mostly Americans did this competition, where you had to make a teeny tiny chair out of only 2 champagne bottles, only using parts of the bottle, and nothing else except for glue. So no paint, no drawing, no other parts.
No welding.
No welding. So that meant the wire cage, the foil, the little cap, the label, and the cork.
Could be used.
So I came up with an idea to make a champagne bubble. So I made that out of the wire cage and the foil. And then it kind of progressed down like a matryoshka doll, like a Russian nesting doll.
Yeah.
So you got the champagne bubble, then the cork. I sliced that in half, carved a negative space shaped like a chair. The next layer was taking the label and making a box, a chair-shaped hollow box, opening that up, and inside that would fit the tiniest of chairs made out of the cage, a little bit of the foil, and a sliver of the cork. And the height to the seat is basically about 1/4 of an inch. So the whole thing fits into the next step, just like a Russian nesting doll.
That's cool. Oh my goodness.
So that's it.
So
years old.
Rebecca Hoffberger.
Yeah, so that was in the AVAM exhibit. Yeah. Oh, and because I got second place in that competition, I had to
mention that.
I had to contact Design Within Reach to say, is there any chance you have that piece from like 3 or 4 years ago.
Of
And it
course
was
they
the
do.
sweetest thing they said is we keep our favorites
Right.
and it's in our
Archive.
conference room
Right.
and we will ship it back to
Absolutely.
you. So I was so excited because I did not want to have to
And
recreate it.
tell everyone what some people may not know Design for Reach. It's a
Design
furniture
Within
store.
Reach is a furniture
Right.
company that recreates famous furniture.
Right.
It is actually not really within reach typically.
But their designs are exquisite, and the
Yeah,
real versions are
famous
tens and thousands
Artist
of dollars.
and architect designed
Absolutely.
furniture. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a fun competition.
Shout
So
out
we
to
got
Design
second
and Reach because
place.
they have amazing stuff,
Yeah,
and you can
cool
still
stuff.
be inspired by it, even
Cool
if you
stuff,
can't
yes.
afford it.
Yeah.
Go to Wayfair.
Okay.
No, don't go there. No,
Right.
shop one of a kind.
Right.
Shop local.
Right.
So, all right. So then, the executive director at a museum for miniatures out in Tucson saw, online my exhibits at the gallery in the Hudson Valley. Shout out to Darren Scala. And so the director at the Mini Time Machine Museum in Tucson, Arizona,
What's
asked
it called
me,
again?
the Mini Time Machine Museum of Miniatures.
Okay.
It's a beautiful museum in Tucson, Arizona. And she asked me to put together, if I was interested, an exhibit proposal to have a solo show in Arizona.
Right.
So,
So you did.
so I did through many back and forth things because at the time I didn't even know what an exhibit proposal was.
Right.
But eventually I came up with doing scenes from famous TV shows, movies, and literature. The library scenes, because, kind of putting together like my theme, what I was often doing, which I should get to a piece over here. A lot of my work ended up having based on books and literature. So before we get to this piece, real quickly, I made some bookends. So again, playing with scale, where I made a normal size book out of heavily rusted steel, and it kind of gives that leather bound look.
Mm-hmm.
And inside of the book is a miniature bookshelf with handmade books that I make as well, not out of metal, they're out of fabric and cardboard, and I do paint the spines.
So how long does it take you to make? Is it called make or fabricate? What's the
Either,
word? Right.
both.
To complete one of your sculptures.
It all depends.
Right.
I mean, something smaller like this could be maybe a few weeks.
And how do you know when you get it? Because obviously,
Yeah, it's a process.
books, right?
The books themselves I call my miniature book factory.
mm,
And I can make, a few hundred,
okay.
weekend,
Right.
with my method. I can't tell you, I
Right.
can't kill you. So, but I also used to collect these book plates. They're called newspaper print plates or book plates, and they are raised and reverse letters like when you do printmaking. And they're
Wow.
very hard to come by
Right.
because when they were just the size of a newspaper page during, I guess, World War
30s?
II, they were melted down,
Right.
reused, and then they shut the process down, came up with new methods.
Right.
And so it's very hard to find these. It's probably like newspaper men
Right.
who have them in their attics.
Well, it's so
and
nice
it's hard to
to
find.
it's so nice to see that you're repurposing that as
Yeah,
well.
that's one of my favorite
Right.
types of materials, but they're
Because
so hard
obviously,
to come
when
by.
they were repurposing them, it was for war.
Yeah, or just reusing them for the next edition. They were daily
Right.
newspapers, so
Right.
it wasn't
And that
always
is
a set.
Right. And that's a whole technique that's
Yeah.
gone forever.
Yeah, because then now they have linotype,
Right.
and just basically by the letter, by the word.
But it's so fascinating
But
to
this
look
was a
at
full
it
sheet.
and to see it, because obviously
Thin
it
sheet of
wouldn't
metal.
be in my lifetime, but to see it and
Yeah.
know that today I can have a piece of that
I think
history.
they stopped kind of in the 70s is one of the
Right.
last ones that
Right.
I've ever seen, because I had one that had Nixon on it.
Right.
So that's, I wanted to get back to, a lot of my work had books in them, and that was typically to just bring in pops of color and changes of texture, and not everything was metal. So based on that, thinking of
Well,
what are the things.
It's also interesting that we're going to move into
The
film,
series of
the film,
libraries.
because in film, there have been like Big and other films, they do models to create the illusion.
Right.
of-
There are miniatures who work in the film and
Right.
commercial industry.
Right.
I hope to.
Right.
And
And they
that
build
make
these tiny
these
sets
that you
right,
sometimes
exactly.
don't even know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I did a series for the Mini Time Machine Museum of Miniatures. I did a series of 6 miniature library scenes from. This one is a little bit of an obscure movie from the 80s called Wings of Desire.
Oh, yeah.
And this was kind of required viewing when I was in architecture school. So it's based on a particular scene. And I also, on the pedestals, try to put scenes from the actual movies.
Oh, wow.
Most of the movie was filmed in black and white.
Yeah.
And this was one elderly man who was daydreaming about peaceful times. The movie was kind of set right after World War II.
The movie is also, if you're a film student, it's kind of required viewing.
Film and architecture,
It's very.
It's a beautiful, esoteric, confusing.
Absolutely. Definitely, if you're in film school, you will be watching this film.
Yeah.
And everyone should watch it because it is just very,
Yeah.
It's like watching poetry or literature.
That's a great way to
It's
describe
a great
it.
movie. It's an excellent movie.
So basically, this elderly man is sitting in this chair, watching this, what's called an orrery, a spinning solar system, a miniature solar system, and he's just watching that, and you're hearing his thoughts.
Right.
And basically, it's Wings of Desire. It's based on these angels, and they're just observing.
Is it a German film?
It's German, yeah, but there is the guy from Colombo is in it,
Right.
but mostly it's German, and so. One of the leads in the movie, the angel, is sitting here in the swivel chair, watching him. Watching him. Yes. So, but this is basically the set. It's up on a balcony in the State Library in Berlin. So this isn't a real place. The room that they used to film in doesn't have all these globes, but the film did, and it was just a beautiful scene of these glowing globes. And then I combine scenes. There's another storyline about a French trapeze artist who's very kind of sad and her lot in life. But another one of the angels develops these feelings for her and wants to be mortal, to be able to connect with her, to feel, to touch, to not live in eternity.
It's really interesting how you've incorporated the fantasy in it as opposed to the actual architectural place that exists.
I tried to figure out, because it's not like the ideas don't always come so easily. The Brady Bunch was set. But other ones I have to figure out, like what scene do I want to do?
That's also interesting about doing the studio tours, talking to the artists and getting inside their head, which came up last night.
The scary place.
Right, absolutely, and how you get those things out in your process, because that's really what this is all about, and in your practice, in your artist practice, in your process, and to coming up with a finished, complete work.
And my work is pretty involved and detailed. But during the process, sometimes I post on Instagram some process photos. And there was a photo of this orrery in my fingertips. And a lot of people commented, "Oh, I want that." I'm like, well, it goes into something else. But that's why I ended up making a few separate.
Are those available?
These are available for sale, much more affordable. So this is an amber sun, and then Japanese glass pinheads.
Wow.
From Japan.
Well, ordered them probably on Etsy,
Right.
but they are probably Japanese made,
right.
real glass pinheads.
Oh my
I
God.
just thought they were so beautiful. And then other ones have a different type of amber for the sun. I tried different ones.
Oh my goodness. So that's like the, what's it called?
Orreries.
Orrery.
And made out of watch parts and lamp parts.
Oh my goodness.
So this is when I started to get away from welding and learn how to silver solder. And that's where other artists really helped me, because I never took a class.
So now I can get a tiny sculpture. I'm so happy.
So I always, I did take a couple of welding classes, but other than that, I just hope to learn through trying it out, through some failures, asking friends, other artists for advice, and eventually I get there, and I'll show you in a bit. So
you've gotten there in a big way, because these are exquisite.
Thank you.
I mean,
so this one, I normally I work on one piece at a time, but during these 6, not all of them came together in my mind clearly at all. So this one is based on a scene in the Library of Congress from All the President's Men, when Woodward and Bernstein are sitting in the library late at night poring over the correspondence that's kept on record at the Library of Congress. And so there's a scene in the movie where it zooms in farther and farther away from them. And they're sitting at the desk in the Library of Congress. And there's just piles and spilling all over the desks of these little records of what was checked out and what phone calls were made. And so the Library of Congress has these concentric circle desks in the space. And some people think of it as, you know, the turning wheels of government. Or what I thought it reminded me of, because it was based on the Washington Post breaking this story, those crazy roller coaster systems of the newspaper conveyor belts. And so I kind of wanted to evoke that. And so back to the newspaper print plates, which come into a lot of my work. These are from a newspaper column. And so each one I would cut out the top, and they became kind of the repetitive newspaper on that conveyor belt. And then the break in the system where Woodward and Bernstein sat. And then throwing a little bit of whimsy, because I like to put in whimsy, is Bernstein would ride his bicycle into the Washington Post every day. And so even though, you know, just combining little elements, he didn't ride his bike to the Library of Congress, but I just thought I would put a teeny tiny bicycle wheel in there, actually from a friend of a suggestion from a friend. And so yeah, so that's this piece in an old foundry form. Careful of the chair. A foundry form. I just, you know, because Library of Congress is round, and I had to fill it in this. So this is not based on the scale that I normally work in, which is typically standard dollhouse scale. It's 1 inch to 1 foot. So this is just, I don't even remember what scale this is, but basically the Library of Congress is 100 feet in diameter, so much smaller. So next, 2 other libraries. This should be recognizable to a lot of people from the 80s, the Breakfast Club. So what I don't put people in my work, but I represent them. So of those 5 kids that were in detention, there was the princess who had her sushi bento box lunch, the athlete who had his letter jacket, the I'm going to forget his moniker, not the Brain. I think it was the Brain, Anthony Michael Hall. And just, you know, he had his books, his backpack. He came in prepared. He was going to do homework. He was going to do work. She was called the Basket Case, Ali Sheedy, and she drew a scene. And I didn't know this until I started researching it. I didn't remember it. But in the book, in her sketchbook, she was drawing a winter scene of a covered bridge. And then, of course, the snow was her dandruff. I didn't put that in. Thought about it. So I found a hiking medal that had a covered bridge. So a cast little piece, so that became her sketchbook. And then the criminal, Judd Nelson, he slammed his knife, his pocket knife, into actually the top of a chair. But I took artistic license and put it in the table. And this chain was kind of his wallet chain, where you go from wallet to pocket. So some artistic license, but I wanted to put those elements in there. And he also had 2 chairs, where every other kid had 1 chair. But he pulled one over to prop his feet on because he was such a badass. Right. And then the weird sculpture that was a real sculpture in, I think it was called Woman, something like that. And so I kind of made this out of a fence finial, some other found objects. And then if you remember when Ali Sheedy, when they took their lunches out, she took a piece of her lunch meat and threw it. And the, I guess, pimento cheese or bologna stuck to the sculpture.
Oh, wow.
So that had to go in.
The detail is ridiculous.
So this one is, back to the photos. So that museum came up with a great way of displaying my work out in Tucson. And they had these huge blow-ups of details behind each vignette, which I loved. Their exhibit was just beautiful. So they were gracious enough to send me the images back when they shipped my sculptures back.
So these are the actual.
So these, well, I had to cut them. They were big 7-foot long photos. I could barely manage them, and it hurt to cut them. But I had to do it just to be able to have them manageable for life. So, sorry.
And it looks like they were made this way. But obviously it would have had like the name of the show and dates and all that.
One of them did, one of them. But I think the one for the All the President's Men had my name and the show and stuff like that. But I used these two in my craft show exhibit.
So as we kind of have to wrap it up here, right. So I want to ask you, what shows do you have coming up?
Nothing really, but I'll get real quick. 3 minutes. So this is Twilight Zone. Time Enough at Last. 2 scenes combined: the vault scene and the destruction of the public library.
Is the vault is it made out of more of the?
The vault scene is the print plates, watch parts, and pocket watches. And I didn't make these eyeglasses; I did buy them. But if you notice, Burgess Meredith's teeny tiny eyeglasses. So we'll quickly, how many minutes do we have? Okay. So real quick, this was the Time Machine.
What movie?
The Time Machine.
Oh,
okay, so the time machine, this one is based on that. So just a progression of the different scenes. I won't get into all the detail, but.
So where's the line part from?
There were some crossovers in the sets. So the New York Public Library, a lot of people, well, one of the more modern makes of the movie was set at the New York Public Library, where the original was set in London, but it was actually made in California on a set that the same Twilight Zone episode used the same set. So you can see that the arch in the Twilight Zone piece is the upside down arch of the New York Public Library. So they use it.
I'm asking Jill some questions because the line situation here is iconic in New York City.
Yeah, from the New York Public Library.
When you enter it, they're like too huge.
Yeah. And so that, in the future, they forget about that books nobody reads. Right. So the guy who's traveling in time asks the people, Eloy, do you have books? Show me your library. I can learn a lot about your culture. And they say, yes, of course we have libraries. And he pulls back the curtain and shows him all the books. And he reaches for one, and it just disintegrates in his hands. And he says, I've learned everything I need to know about your culture. It was, these are pretty...
Very profound.
Yeah, profound.
Very cinematic.
Detailed.
And then this is the Time Machine.
But this is also wonderful because you can...
Old library card catalog drawers. Yeah, and they're all catalog drawers,
Do they have the front of them? Right.
Time for one last one. And then we're working on that. So this was based on the Fahrenheit 451.
Oh, wow.
So the scene, this beautiful movie. Definitely another highly recommended movie and book to read.
I think for Fahrenheit 451 is a piece that everyone should be familiar with, and if you aren't, you should. It's such an iconic piece of literature, particularly for American education.
But back to when libraries and books were criminalized and nobody read, firemen came into your home to burn books. So that was the library, the attic scene where the firemen came in.
That's where Big Brother comes from and all of that.
And threw them over the balcony and dumped them on her floor until they basically, she set them ablaze.
Right. So, and I think they redid that movie last year with Will Smith, if I'm not correct.
With Michael B. Jordan. Michael B. Jordan, yeah.
Sorry, Michael.
And because the card catalog was kind of digitalized with his name, he was pretty cool in it too. So I started incorporating again other metals. This is a child's silver spoon, and this is a key from Nuremberg. The back of the chair is an old antique key.
From
From
Nuremberg?
Nuremberg. I had it shipped. I found a guy had a collection of
Wow.
like 40 antique keys.
Did you buy all of them?
Of course.
Okay,
It
good.
actually wasn't bad.
Right.
And it came in a little box. It was all of my stuff.
But it's so
I will
good
buy,
to
you know-
hear, again, the backstory.
Yeah.
You have
Yes.
keys from Nuremberg. Like,
Yeah,
that's so
yeah,
legendary
yeah.
in so many ways.
Yeah,
That's
that was
amazing.
exciting. So I don't have a lathe, but I turned all of these using my belt sander, and I can quickly show you some
That's
machinery
crazy.
if you want. If you have that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So if you want to quickly look at some of
The
machinery
machines that you use to make these pieces.
I like vintage machines. So this is my bandsaw, and my drill press is behind you, and then my belt sander. So I use all three of these a lot.
All right, so let's get your table so you can tell what's going on and what's coming up.
Okay. All right. So my latest project is not involving steel, not involving welding at all. But
So is this like an evolution for you?
no, this is
Okay.
kind of a weird sidetrack that I got presented with.
Okay.
So a year ago, last September, somebody contacted me and said, "Would you be interested in making multiples of a miniature?" That's all he said. I looked him up because who knew whether it was going to be real or what was happening. I looked him up. He made little films, so I thought, all right, he seems legit. And I wrote back. I said, "I'm intrigued. Tell me more." So basically, that's
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So that's basically when the rest of the story kind of came out. So there's a music producer who won 2 gold and 1 platinum album for a song for an album called "Friends Keep Secrets," and
Never heard of it. Who is
the
it?
songs are called "East Side" and "Roses," which produced by Benny Blanco, Khalid, and Halsey sings on each
Oh
song.
my God.
Wow.
So
So
already,
they reached out to you here in tiny Baltimore and
Tiny Baltimore.
and Clipper. Where are we?
yeah.
Hampton
Also
East.
Clifford,
Oh my
Hill
God,
Road.
that's amazing.
So
Jill.
they found me as a miniaturist because
That's
instead of
phenomenal.
making a full-size framed albums like regular people in the music industry, and not as many people buy physical albums anymore. They buy songs through
Stream
the
it.
internet. They stream it. So they just thought it would be really fun and subversive to make a miniature version of a framed gold and platinum album with a magnifying glass, and present it to all the people that helped get them to
So how many are
20
you
million.
making?
So I've already made 31 and shipped those out. So they all have them. Ed Sheeran has one.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so I'm making another 30
Jill.
so it's a big
Okay,
commission.
we're gonna have to take
It's a
modesty.
big commission. That
Okay,
is something.
so
So I don't have a finished one
Right.
here
Oh.
because I'm in between. Because I've shipped the first.
did you post them on your Instagram or somewhere so we can see
Not
them?
yet, but I will in the next couple of weeks.
So I just have to take a break. This is why doing these studio tours are so important, because we have this amazing talent right here in Baltimore. I mean, you're working with artists who are currently right now today changing music,
Yeah.
and you're presenting them with the visual to that. I mean, that is amazing.
It's been
So-
very exciting,
so
terrifying. Because
Why is it terrifying?
unbeknownst to the creative directors that contacted me, I've never spoken to
Right.
Benny or
Right.
Khalid or
Right.
Halsey. But the creative director is super sweet and very patient with me. And I basically said yes to a project I didn't know how to make.
Oh.
So I learned how to silver solder, how to flame paint copper. So this is what's called flame painting on copper. So you heat it up multiple times, heat it, cool it, heat it, and you get these beautiful colors, blues, yellows, pinks. So basically, they sent me a design, which kind of looks like this one. It was a very simple frame. Benny loves pink. Very simple frame, kind of a tie-dye background, which was based on a sweatshirt on, I think, the album cover.
Mhm.
And then I made them 2 prototypes. One as close to what they showed me as possible, and one with my artistic imprint on it, and hope for the best. And they ended up picking
Like-
up my design.
Of course, right.
So it was and so this is not a finished one because I ended up kind of butchering it and trying different things out. So
Mhm.
this is not a finished one, clearly. It's the others weren't as shiny. I was trying different sealants out, but it's the basic look. So if you can see the size of the record labels, there's Benny himself. So you can see the record label is that tiny, and the plaque, you can't see this without the magnifying glass. So the plaque says Friends Keep Secrets, presented to Benny Blanco's friends for 20 million in sales. Like, it was just, everything was a challenge, trying to find a way to print that to be legible.
How did they find you?
I asked them that. So that first guy that wrote to me, who actually moved on to better, bigger things, they told me just recently, started making more films. I guess he just delved into the miniatures world, and luckily they found me, even though I did not know how to make this at the time. I wasn't going to tell anybody that until I already finished the 31, and they've gotten them, and they're really happy.
I'm so excited we got that scoop.
So here's one record.
That's a
and
record.
What's funny is when I first designed it, I wanted to do my typical scale, which was 1 inch to 1 foot. So a typical album is 12 inches. So I was going to make 1 inch records, but they kept asking, can you go smaller? Can you go smaller?
Really?
So these records are 1/2 inch, where the labels themselves are 3/16 of an inch. And so in addition to having real magnifying lenses attached to the piece, that was their design, I've had to get multiple magnifying lenses, stronger and stronger, to work with this, and my eyesight is shot. So I have pretty heavy duty magnification now to be able to work on this with tiny, just
utensils,
tweezers,
tools,
doing everything.
So how long does one of these take to make?
Well, I make them in batches. So I made that first 30 and made them, and that took me 2 months. And so this next batch should go out in early December.
Well,
so here's a picture of how all the frames, these are sterling silver frames that end up getting painted. Painted pink. Benny Blanco pink. And there's flowers on the sterling silver. I mean, I picked all this stuff out. I was very particular and meticulous with how I wanted each little bit to come together, So with the song, one of the famous songs on his album is called Roses. So this is called Pattern Wire. So I wanted flowers to be on the frame. And
well, obviously they came to the correct person, because you're able to do that. That seemed so meticulous, and
I was glad they found me. As stressful as the process was, because I did not always know how to do things.
Well, we're so happy to have been with you today, and that was quite the way to wrap up our first virtual studio tour this morning, and I'm so happy that you're my friend even more now. I'm so excited for you. That's amazing. That's an amazing story, and I hope our media here gets wind of that, because they need to be talking to you. That is such an amazing story. I mean,
actually,
that's what it's all
I
about.
just talked to the creative director Friday, because I have not revealed any of this in social media other than to friends in person. And so I just asked them, I was like, can I start revealing this yet? He was like, absolutely.
We have it. So with that, I'm going to say thank you to our sponsors, the Maryland State Arts Council, and to Rita Vodka. We're off to our next virtual tour, and our 32nd annual, and our first virtual open studio tour with Bopa. And once again, this is Jill Orlov, and I was going to name last name incorrect. But anyway, so definitely check out and visit Jill on all of her
Instagram and not really Facebook, but Instagram.
And you have
and my website. It's just my name, Jill Orlov.
.com. And so thank you so much.
Thank you.